All right, we're about to unpack a really complicated story. It's one that sits right at the messy intersection of high finance, huge corporate power, and, yeah, race. It's got a trailblazing CEO, a massive bank, and a private party that ended up setting off a global firestorm.
And really, it all comes down to this one central question. Was Tidjane Thiam, the only black CEO of a major European bank, pushed out of his job because of his race? Now, the official story is a firm no, but the details that trickled out, well, they tell a much more complicated story.
So to really get what happened here, we've got to start with the man right in the middle of it all, Tidjane Thiam.
You have to understand, when Tidjane Thiam took the top job at Credit Suisse back in 2015, it was a huge deal. I mean, he wasn't just the first black CEO of a major European bank, he was a total outsider, a French Ivorian executive stepping into the very closed-off world of Swiss banking. And you know what? He was good at it. He pulled off this massive, painful restructuring, and most importantly, he made the bank profitable again after years of losses. But even with all that success, it didn't exactly mean he was welcomed with open arms.
Okay, so let's zoom in on one specific night. A night that was supposed to be private, but would end up cracking this whole story wide open and shaking a global bank to its very foundations.
Picture this. Zurich, November 2019. The bank's chairman, a guy named Urs Rohner, is throwing a huge party for his 60th birthday. It's a who's who of Switzerland's financial elite, and Tidjane Thiam is there as the only black guest in the room.
So during the party, the entertainment starts. First up, a black dancer comes out on stage dressed as a janitor, sweeping the floor as part of the act. Thiam, his own company's CEO, is so put off by this caricature that he literally gets up and walks out. But when he comes back later, he's hit with something else. A group of the chairman's buddies get on stage to perform, and they're all wearing these giant afro wigs.
His reaction, which was later reported, just says it all. Astonished again. I mean, what a quiet but incredibly powerful summary of the racial and cultural tone deafness he was seeing right at the very top of the company he was running.
And here's where the story gets really twisted. Because Thiam's departure from Credit Suisse, it wasn't officially connected to this party at all. Nope. His exit was blamed on a totally different, bizarre scandal, which created these two competing stories.
Now, this timeline is so important to understanding what's going on. The party happens in November 2019, right? But Thiam doesn't resign until 3 months later, in February 2020. And the rest of us? We don't find out about what happened at that party until October 2020, almost a full year later. That sequence is everything.
So here's the deal. Officially, the story was that Thiam had to resign because of this wild corporate spying scandal where the bank was caught surveilling former employees. Even though an investigation cleared Thiam of knowing about it, the board said he had to take the fall to restore the bank's reputation. But bubbling right underneath that official story, the party incident raised these huge, nagging questions. Was this party just a symptom of a much deeper, rotten culture? And did Thiam's race and his outsider status just make him an easy target?
For months, this was all just whispers in the hallways of finance. And then a massive investigation by the New York Times finally connected the dots between that private party and Thiam's very public exit, and it forced a major reckoning.
The Times report was an absolute bombshell. They talked to over a dozen people close to the situation, and their big conclusion was that race was an ever-present factor throughout his tenure. The story painted this picture of a leader who, even with all his success, never stopped fighting for acceptance and respect inside his own bank. And look, this wasn't just the newspaper's take. Even before anyone knew about the party, one of Credit Suisse's biggest investors called the whole campaign to get rid of Thiam a witch hunt with a twist of racism. His own sister said that the old guard Swiss establishment just found it unbearable to see a black man in that position of power. And later, Thiam himself admitted he had received racist treatment.
And what did the bank have to say? Well, they did this classic corporate two-step. They issued a statement apologizing for any offense caused by the party, but in the very same breath, they called the reporting a total mischaracterization. So basically, it was a textbook, "We're sorry you're upset, but we didn't do anything wrong."
So why are we spending all this time on one story about one CEO? Because it's not just about one story. It peels back the curtain on a much bigger, systemic issue in the entire world of finance. I want you to just look at this number. 1. That's it.
That's how many black CEOs there were among all the world's biggest banks when Tidjane Thiam was in charge. That single digit just screams how deep the lack of diversity runs at the very top of global finance. His presence wasn't just rare, it was a complete anomaly. And his story really shows the unbelievable pressure that comes with being the first and only one.
And this problem is especially bad in Switzerland. This chart really tells the story. You see that while over 90% of Swiss companies have policies for gender diversity, which is great, but then look at the other bar, less than half have any kind of strategy for ethnic diversity. The gap is massive. It's pretty clear that racial inclusion just hasn't been a priority.
So, what's the takeaway from all this? It's that two seemingly opposite things can be true at the exact same time. On one hand, you have the official story. A CEO resigns over a spying scandal. Okay, but running right alongside that is the deeper story. A groundbreaking black leader was dealing with constant cultural resistance and a really uninclusive environment. And the most important thing to remember is that the first story doesn't cancel out the second.
And all of that leaves us with this one big final question. This whole scandal exposed these deep cracks in a corporate culture. Tidjane Thiam is gone. The chairman who threw the party is gone. The bank itself doesn't even exist anymore. It got bought out. But that fundamental problem is still there. So you have to ask, after all the apologies and new HR policies, what does it really take for a corporate culture to actually truly change?